All right, we're going to talk about solving problems that contain decimals when you're dealing with adding and subtracting. So adding and subtracting of decimals. So when you're talking about adding and subtracting decimals, there's really only one rule you have to remember. And it's a very important one. And it's line up the decimals. As long as you remember to do that, you should have no problems. So I'm going to rewrite this problem. So I have 4.56, and I need to write 10.2 so that the decimals are directly below each other. You can fill in any empty spaces with zeros if you need to. Especially subtraction, you get to that more. Addition, it's not quite as important. And then it's just normal addition. I'm going to do 6 plus 0, 5 plus 2, 4 plus 0, and 1. And to know where my decimal point goes, it just comes straight down. So it's pretty easy as long as you remember to line up the decimal, okay? So 14.76. So let's look at another example. This one is our subtracting decimals. As you might imagine, the most important thing to remember to do is line up the decimals. So if I'm going to write this one out, I've got 12.98. And I need to line up that 2.051. When you're writing it, be careful not to jam all the numbers together, because if they're jammed together too much, it might be hard to see what's supposed to be above and below each other. Now this is one where I definitely have to add that 0, because when I go to do my subtraction, I'm actually going to have to borrow to make that 0 a 10 so that I can take away 1 from it. A common mistake is people they don't write a number there, and they end up just bringing the 1 down. It doesn't work like that, okay? So go ahead and do it out. We bring our decimal down, and we get 10.929, okay? So as long as you remember to line up the decimals, that is the most important thing to do. So go ahead and pause it and try these two on your own, and then hit play to see what the answer should be. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do these out. So I'm going to rewrite them, lining up my decimals and filling in any zeros I need. Go ahead and subtract. I can borrow from this, so this is kind of silly because I end up with 12 again. So I could have just done 12 in the first place. 9, and then I bring my decimal down. So 9.26. Make sure you're doing the correct operation. If it says subtracting, subtract. It says adding, let's add. So this next one, we got 5.5 plus 198.72. Filling in any zeros I may need. Do my adding, do my carrying, don't forget to carry, I get my number, and then I bring my decimal straight down. So that's the answer to those two. Let's try some more practice. Okay, so as we're working through these, there's two important properties to think about, and they're very similar. There's the commutative property and the associative property. The commutative property says it doesn't matter what order you add things in. So if I'm adding 3 plus 4, that's the same as 4 plus 3. I'm going to get 7 either way. Okay? So this commutative property is true for addition. So when adding, the order does not matter. Now, if you think about it, this is not true for subtraction, right? The order does matter in subtraction. If I start subtracting and I flip the order around, I'm going to get a different answer. But it's also true for multiplication. We're not going to mention this, we're not going to put this up there right now because we're only talking about adding and subtracting today. But it is also true for multiplication. So commutative property, when adding, the order does not matter. You can flip around the order. Associative is very similar to that. It's talking about the order, but it's talking about the order when you're talking about parentheses. So if I had a problem like this, I can move those parentheses around, or really I could also just get rid of them, and no matter what, I'll get the same answer. Okay, so if I do this one first at the top, it's 10 plus 3 is 13. If I do that, I get 7 plus 6, also 13. And if I add all these up, I get 13. So no matter how I group the numbers when I'm adding, so when adding, You can group the numbers however you like. And it won't change the answer, okay? So these are both helpful tools if you need to do things in different orders. If you want to physically move the order around or realize that the parentheses don't matter and you can end up changing them around. These are two important properties talking about the order. And it has to do when you're adding, and as we'll talk about later on, also multiplying. This is not true if there's subtraction in there. Subtraction does matter what order you do it in. So this is for when you're adding. So be sure to copy these down. If you need to pause it to write this all down, go ahead and do that. All right, so let's look at some more examples. In this example, we might want to help ourselves out by regrouping. Looking at the first one, see if there's any numbers that you might want to group together. When I'm looking, I'm seeing I want to group these two together, okay? Because if I add 8.9 and 10.1 together, and I can because it's all adding, I'm going to get a whole number. So I get 19. So now I'm doing 19 plus 24.771. It doesn't make it drastically easier, but even if it makes it a little bit easier, it can be nicer to do it this way. And I get 43.771 for my ultimate answer, okay? Now this next one, think about how you might be able to use the associative property. Pause it and go ahead and try to group it differently. All right, so instead of grouping those two together, I'm going to move and I want to do those two together first. 15.25 and 5.75. Because this is going to give me, again, another nice whole number, 21. So now I'm adding 21 to this number, and it's making it a lot easier. So when you're adding those whole numbers, it's usually a lot easier to do. So look out for that. You don't have to do it. You'd get the same answer if you did it the other order, but it can usually make the math a little bit easier. So think about using the commutative property, which is what we did up here, and the associative property, which is what we use down here, to rearrange the order to make it easier. All right, so go ahead and pause this one and try it on your own. Notice what operations there are and see if you're allowed to move things around or not. And then hit play to see what the answer is. All right, on this one, I can't move things around because I have that subtraction, so I have to do the parentheses first. So I get 8.29. And remember, it's going to be 24.8 minus 8.29. So I'm going to write it in that order, 24.8 minus 8.29, and fill in my 0 where I need it. So I'm going to do my borrowing, need to do some more borrowing, and I get my ultimate answer of 16.51. So remember, it's parentheses first, and then I did my subtraction. All right, last practice problem. Go ahead and pause it, try it on your own, and then hit play to find out what the answer is. All right, so I can't use the properties this time because, again, I have subtraction. And remember, I go left to right when I only have addition and subtraction. So I'm going to start with the subtraction to do a bunch of borrowing here. And I get 13.28. And then last step, don't forget to add on that number. When you're doing more than one step, it's a very common mistake to stop after the first one. Be careful and double check that you've done everything you're supposed to be doing. And I get my answer, 24.36. So that's adding and subtracting decimals. The biggest thing throughout, make sure you're lining up those decimals. As long as you do that, you should be fine.